Asterisk, asterisk, single mom, attends the wrong wedding. The billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. Asterisk, asterisk. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin with today's story. Rachel Martinez had always done her best to give her kids a better life, despite the hardships that came with being a single mother. Her life wasn't glamorous, and the odds were often stacked against her. Yet, she found solace in her two precious children, twins, who were everything to her. As a waitress at a small diner in the heart of the city, Rachel barely made ends meet. Still, she kept her head up and faced every challenge with resilience. One afternoon, she received an invitation to a wedding. At first, she was confused. She didn't know anyone getting married. But as she read the name on the invite, she realized that it was addressed to her, though mistakenly sent to her by someone else's wedding planner. It was meant for another Rachel, a wealthy woman with a similar name. Rachel hesitated. She couldn't afford a fancy dress or a babysitter for her twins, but the idea of attending an upscale wedding was tempting. It was a chance to step out of her ordinary life and experience something different, even if just for a moment. So, she decided to go. She found an old dress that barely fit, put on her best smile, and headed to the event with her twins in tow. As she walked through the grand entrance of the luxurious ballroom, she felt completely out of place. The guests were all dressed in extravagant attire, laughing and chatting as if they belonged in a different world. She, however, felt like a fish out of water. The elegant chandeliers and the shimmering decor made her feel even more out of place. She looked down at her children, who were dressed in clothes they had worn too many times before. The twins, sensing their mother's discomfort, clung to her sides, their innocent eyes wide with wonder. Just as Rachel tried to blend in, her son accidentally bumped into a man, knocking over a glass of champagne. The man's sharp gaze turned toward her. His eyes widened as he looked at her twins. Rachel froze. The man was none other than the groom, Alexander Reed, a well-known billionaire CEO. But what shocked him wasn't the spilled drink, it was the sight of the twins. He immediately stood still, his eyes locked on them with a look of disbelief. The room seemed to freeze around them. Rachel was caught off guard, not understanding why this stranger was staring at her children like that. She quickly apologized, trying to make her exit, but Alexander's gaze followed them, his mind racing. Who were these children, and why did they look so familiar? What was the connection? Was this a coincidence, or was there something deeper going on? Rachel had no idea, but she felt an inexplicable sense of tension building in the air. Little did she know, this accidental encounter would change everything. The billionaire groom had just found something he hadn't expected his past, perhaps staring back at him. Asterisk, asterisk. Single mom attends the wrong wedding. The billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. Asterisk, asterisk. After the awkward encounter in the ballroom, Rachel Martinez felt the heat of 1,000 stares upon her. She quickly gathered her children and made her way toward the exit, her heart pounding. The groom, Alexander Reed, had looked at her like she was someone from his past, but she couldn't understand why. She had never met him before. As she walked toward the door, she heard his voice behind her, calm but commanding. Wait. Rachel hesitated, unsure whether to turn around. She had already embarrassed herself enough, but then she heard him again. Please, I need to speak with you. Against her better judgment, Rachel stopped. She turned around and faced the man who had just been the center of attention at this lavish event. Alexander stood there, his tall frame towering over her. He looked different from the other guests, more serious, his expression guarded. He wasn't the typical groom. His gaze moved from her to the twins, still standing close to her, clutching her hands. He cleared his throat before speaking again. I apologize for staring, but your children... His voice trailed off, and Rachel could see that he was searching for words. They look like someone I used to know, someone very important to me. Rachel felt a surge of confusion wash over her. I don't understand, she said softly, her brow furrowing. Who are you, and why do my kids look familiar to you? Alexander took a step closer. My name is Alexander Reed. I'm the groom, and, well, this may sound strange, but I think your children might be mine." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. The room around her suddenly felt like it was closing in. "What?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander seemed to be struggling with the words. "I know this sounds crazy, but I have a daughter. She's been missing from my life for a long time. And seeing your twins, something about them." He paused, glancing down at her children once again. "They remind me so much of her. I need to know if there's a possibility that they could be—" His voice faltered. Rachel shook her head in disbelief. "This is insane. My children have no connection to you. I don't even know who you are. Why would you say something like that?" Alexander looked genuinely sorry. "I'm not trying to upset you, but this isn't the first time I've felt a strange pull when I see them. I'm a billionaire, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but I need to know the truth." Rachel looked at the twins. They were too young to understand what was happening, but they must have sensed the tension in the air. Her son tugged at her arm, and she looked down at him, trying to calm herself. She couldn't understand what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure: this was a question that needed answers. Alexander continued, his voice softer now. "I want to help. If there's any chance they're mine, I'd like to be involved. I want to make sure they have everything they need." Rachel felt a wave of anger mixed with confusion. How could this man, who had been living a life of wealth and privilege, suddenly claim that he wanted to be a part of her children's life? "You can't just come here and make wild claims like that. You don't know us," she said firmly, her voice shaking with emotion. But Alexander didn't back down. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to know the truth. Let me help. If I'm not their father, then I'll walk away. But if there's even a small chance, I need to know." Rachel's mind was racing. She had no answers for him. She didn't even know how to process the possibility that this man could be connected to her children. She glanced down at her twins, wondering if they could somehow sense the weight of the situation. The room was silent for a long moment, and then Alexander added, "I know this is a lot to ask, but would you be willing to meet with me later? I just need to understand what's going on." Rachel hesitated. Her instincts told her to walk away, to keep her children away from this rich, powerful man. But something about the way he spoke, his genuine confusion, his desire to understand, made her pause. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice steady. "But this doesn't mean anything. You're not part of our life, and I don't want to get my hopes up." Alexander nodded, a look of understanding crossing his face. "I just need to know the truth." Rachel turned and walked away, her children following her, but her mind was reeling. Was this man really their father? Was this all just a bizarre coincidence, or was there something more to it? She didn't have the answers, but she knew this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. *** single mom. Attends the wrong wedding. The billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. ***. It had been 2 days since Rachel had met Alexander Reed, the billionaire groom who had dropped a bombshell in the middle of her already chaotic life. The memory of his words, "I think your children might be mine," kept playing over and over in her mind. She hadn't expected to hear something so outrageous, and certainly not at a wedding she never should have attended in the first place. She couldn't stop thinking about it, though, and as much as she wanted to dismiss the whole thing as a misunderstanding, there was something in Alexander's eyes that made her doubt her own instincts. Could it really be possible? Could her twins be his? The more Rachel thought about it, the more questions piled up. How would she even begin to prove something like this? And why would a man like Alexander, with all his wealth and power, care about children he had never even known existed? It seemed impossible, yet the more she thought about the look in his eyes, the more Rachel felt like she had no choice but to get some answers. She couldn't ignore him forever, and if there was even a chance that Alexander was the father of her children, she needed to know the truth. That night, Rachel sat down with her children in their small living room, the twins playing quietly on the floor. She watched them for a moment, their innocent laughter filling the room, before the knock on her door broke her out of her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Alexander standing there, his expression a mixture of determination and something else, maybe hope. "Rachel," he said softly, "I know this is a lot to ask, but I couldn't stop thinking about what happened at the wedding. I need to talk to you, and I understand if you're not ready, but if you are." He trailed off, his gaze drifting to the twins, who were now watching him with curiosity. Rachel stood in the doorway, her heart racing. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her children. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Alexander entered, and for a moment, the room felt too small for both of them. There was a tension in the air that Rachel could feel, but she wasn't sure if it was just from her own nerves or if Alexander was feeling it too. She closed the door softly behind them and gestured for him to sit. "What do you want from me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Alexander sat down, his hands resting in his lap as he looked at the twins. "I'm not asking you to let me into your life," he said, his voice low. "But I need to know, if there's even a chance that these children are mine, I want to do right by them. I want to be a part of their lives." Rachel felt a pang in her chest. This was not the answer she had expected. "You don't get to just waltz in here and make demands. You have no idea what it's like to raise these kids on your own, to struggle every day just to keep us afloat. You don't know anything about our lives." Her voice wavered, but she held her ground. "I'm not asking to take over," Alexander said quickly, his eyes softening. "I just want to know if I'm their father. If I am, I'll do whatever I can to help. I'll respect your boundaries, but I have to know." Rachel felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her children, and they deserved the truth. But how could she trust a man who had only just come into their lives, claiming to be their father? She wasn't sure what to believe, but the more she looked at Alexander, the more she realized he wasn't going to leave her alone until he had answers. "Okay," Rachel said, taking a deep breath. "We'll take a paternity test, but this doesn't change anything. If you're their father, fine. But I'm not going to let you disrupt their lives just because you want to be part of the picture now." Alexander nodded, his expression serious. "I understand. And thank you, Rachel. You won't regret this." As he left, Rachel stood at the door for a long time, staring at the twins as they played. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear: her life was about to change forever. Asterisk, asterisk, single mom, attends the wrong wedding. The billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. Asterisk, asterisk, after agreeing to the paternity test, Rachel Martinez couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had taken root in her gut. The days leading up to the test were filled with a sense of dread. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the truth. Her life, her children's lives, had been upended by this strange twist of fate. Alexander Reed, the billionaire groom, was determined to know if he was their father. But Rachel wasn't convinced. She still felt a deep sense of uncertainty about his sudden interest in her children. It felt like a distant dream that a man with so much wealth and power could suddenly want to be a part of their humble lives. Could it really be true? Could her twins truly be his? As the day of the paternity test approached, Rachel tried to focus on the things she could control: her children's happiness and well-being. She tried to ignore the persistent thoughts of Alexander and the mystery that hung over them. But when the day came, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. With her twins in tow, Rachel arrived at the clinic. The waiting room was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft sound of papers rustling in the distance filling the air. The twins sat next to her, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. Rachel tried to remain calm, but her hands were clammy and her heart raced as the minutes ticked by. Finally, they were called in. The nurse led them to a small room where the test would take place. It was all routine, nothing out of the ordinary. But for Rachel, every moment felt like an eternity. She couldn't help but steal glances at the twins as they played with a few toys the nurse had given them. They looked so innocent, so pure. They didn't deserve to be caught up in the tangled web of uncertainty that now surrounded them. After what seemed like an eternity, the test was over. Rachel and her children left the clinic and went back to their small apartment, the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. She couldn't stop thinking about the test results, wondering how they would change everything. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever outcome awaited her. The days that followed were filled with a tense silence. Rachel tried to keep her mind off the results, but they were never far from her thoughts. It was as if the clock was ticking down to an inevitable moment of truth. Then, a week later, the call came. Rachel's hands trembled as she picked up the phone. It was from the clinic. Her heart raced as she listened to the voice on the other end of the line. "Miss Martinez, the results are in. We need you to come in and pick them up." The words were like a punch to the gut. She hung up the phone, feeling numb. The moment had come. She had to face the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. With her twins by her side, Rachel made her way to the clinic once again. This time, however, the air felt heavier, charged with the weight of the unknown. When she arrived, The nurse handed her the envelope with the results. Her hands shook as she took it, but she forced herself to remain calm. She couldn't let her children see how much this moment terrified her. Alexander was right about one thing. If the test results confirmed what he suspected, it would change everything. Rachel took the envelope home and locked herself in her apartment, away from the prying eyes of the outside world. She sat on the couch, the twins playing quietly in the corner. For a long time, she just stared at the envelope, wondering if she was ready to open it. Finally, with a deep breath, she tore it open. Her eyes scanned the paper quickly, and her heart stopped. The results were in. Alexander Reed was, in fact, the father of her twins. The shock hit her like a wave, sweeping over her with an intensity she hadn't expected. How was this possible? What did this mean for her children? What did this mean for her? She sat there, stunned, trying to process the information. The answers she had been seeking for so long were now in her hands, but the question remained, what would she do with them? She had no idea. But one thing was certain: her life was about to change forever. Asterisk, asterisk, single mom, attends the wrong wedding. The billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. Asterisk, asterisk. Rachel stared at the paternity test results in disbelief. She had spent days running through every possible scenario, but the reality that Alexander Reed was the father of her twins was something she hadn't been prepared for. The weight of the truth settled heavily on her chest, and for a moment she could barely breathe. It felt like her entire world had shifted in the blink of an eye. What was she supposed to do now? She wasn't sure. Her life had always been a struggle, filled with obstacles, and now this revelation that her children's father was a billionaire CEO felt like something straight out of a fairy tale. But this wasn't a fairy tale. This was her life, and it had just become more complicated than ever. After staring at the results for what felt like hours, Rachel knew she had to make a decision. She couldn't keep living in limbo, wondering what would happen next. It was time to face Alexander and figure out what this meant for her and the twins. But even the thought of seeing him again made her stomach churn. What did he want from her? Was he just going to swoop in and claim his children, changing their lives forever? Or was he willing to respect her boundaries and allow them to live the life they had built without interference? As Rachel sat there, trying to work through her feelings, her children's laughter from the other room broke her thoughts. They had no idea what was going on. To them, their mother was just the person who fed them, comforted them, and took care of their needs. Their world was simple, and they didn't have to worry about billionaires or paternity tests. All they cared about was being loved and cared for. Rachel looked at them, a surge of love and protectiveness overwhelming her. She had always promised herself that she would do whatever it took to give her children a better life. But now, she wondered if that promise included allowing Alexander to be a part of their lives. The next morning, Rachel couldn't put it off any longer. She called Alexander and arranged a meeting. Her nerves were on edge as she prepared for what was sure to be an emotional conversation. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew that this would change everything. When Alexander arrived, he looked just as he had at the wedding, confident, composed, and a little out of place in her modest apartment. He stood awkwardly in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. "Rachel," he said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "I didn't want to put any pressure on you, but I couldn't stop thinking about the test results. I need to know what happens next." Rachel met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "I've seen the results," she said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "You're their father, but that doesn't mean you get to waltz in and take over their lives. I've raised them on my own, and I'm not sure I'm ready to let anyone change that." Alexander looked taken aback, his expression softening. "I understand. I know I can't just come into your life and expect things to change overnight, but I want to be there for them. I want to be involved, to help, and to make sure they have everything they need." Rachel shook her head, her emotions bubbling to the surface. "You don't understand. I've done everything for them. I've sacrificed everything. I won't let anyone just waltz in and take control. They're my children, and I'll protect them." Alexander stepped forward, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I'm not trying to take control, Rachel. I'm just trying to make sure they have the support they deserve. I don't want to be an absentee father. I want to be there for them, to help you in any way I can." Rachel hesitated, her heart torn. She had spent so long keeping her children safe from the world, from people who didn't understand the struggles they faced. Could she trust Alexander? Could she trust that he wasn't just a wealthy man looking to check a box or ease his conscience? Her children deserved better than that. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something more: genuine care and concern. "I'm not sure what this is going to look like," Rachel said softly, "but I'm willing to give you a chance. I can't promise everything will be easy, but I'm willing to see if we can figure this out for their sake." Alexander nodded, a look of relief crossing his face. "Thank you, Rachel. I won't let you down." As he left her apartment that day, Rachel felt a strange mix of emotions. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: this was only the beginning. Her life, and her children's, was about to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. Asterisk, asterisk, single mom, attends the wrong wedding. The billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. Asterisk, asterisk. The next few days were a whirlwind for Rachel. After agreeing to give Alexander a chance to be involved in her children's lives, things began to shift in ways she hadn't expected. The tension that had built up between them during their first meeting slowly started to ease, but the uncertainty still lingered. Alexander made an effort to respect her boundaries while also trying to get to know the twins, visiting her apartment a few times a week. At first, Rachel kept her distance. She was cautious, unsure about how much she was willing to let him into their lives. The kids, however, seemed to warm to him almost immediately. Her son, Elijah, had a natural curiosity about everything, and he was particularly drawn to Alexander's stories of his travels and adventures. Elijah was a bright boy, full of questions, and he was fascinated by the idea that his father might actually be a millionaire. Her daughter, Lily, was more reserved but still seemed intrigued by the attention Alexander gave her. She was quieter, a little more skeptical, but there was something about him that made her smile every time he spoke. The evenings they spent together were strange for Rachel. She had spent so long being the sole provider and protector of her children that having Alexander around felt almost unnatural. He was so different from the men she had encountered in her life. His world was filled with luxury, and yet he seemed to genuinely want to be involved in their lives. The turning point came when Alexander invited Rachel and the twins to dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. At first, Rachel refused. She couldn't shake the feeling that this might be too much too soon. She wasn't ready to let him in that deeply. But after a few more visits, she realized that he wasn't asking for anything in return. He wasn't trying to play the role of a father figure right away. He just wanted to spend time with them. After some thought, Rachel agreed. It felt like a small step forward, but a significant one. When they arrived at the restaurant, Rachel couldn't help but feel out of place. The sleek, modern design of the building was intimidating, and she couldn't stop comparing it to her modest apartment. The waitstaff treated them with a level of respect that Rachel wasn't used to, and the fact that they were ushered into a private dining area made her feel even more self-conscious. But as the evening wore on, something changed. The twins were happy, laughing at jokes Alexander made, and Rachel saw a side of him that she hadn't seen before. He wasn't just a billionaire CEO. He was someone who genuinely cared about her children. He asked Elijah about his schoolwork and listened intently to Lily as she described her favorite book. Rachel watched them interact, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to relax. She hadn't realized just how much she had been holding on to her fears and doubts. As the night came to a close, Rachel felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The fear of the unknown was still there, but it was starting to fade. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like there might be a place for Alexander in their lives. On the way home, as they all piled into the car, Elijah leaned over to her and whispered, "Mom, I think he's nice. Can we see him again soon?" Rachel smiled softly, her heart swelling with emotion. She hadn't expected this to be so easy, but her children were already starting to accept Alexander into their world. "We'll see," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll see." That night, as she tucked her children into bed, Rachel felt a flicker of hope. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she was beginning to see that the world didn't have to be so small. There were possibilities beyond her struggles, beyond the walls of their apartment, and maybe, just maybe, Alexander Reed could be a part of that. She didn't know what his role in their lives would be, but she was willing to take the next step. The journey wasn't over, but it was starting to feel a little less uncertain. Asterisk, asterisk, single mom, attends the wrong wedding, the billionaire groom, freezes when he sees the twins, asterisk, asterisk. A few weeks passed after the dinner, and Rachel couldn't help but notice a subtle change in her family dynamics. Alexander had been visiting more often, but always on her terms. He would bring small gifts for the twins, things like books or toys, but never anything extravagant. He respected the boundaries she had set, and in doing so, Rachel began to see a side of him that she had initially been too skeptical to notice. He genuinely cared about her children, and he wasn't trying to buy their affection. It was clear he wanted to be involved, but it was also clear that he respected Rachel's role as their mother. The weeks that followed were filled with small but meaningful moments. One afternoon, as the twins played outside, Alexander arrived with a soccer ball. "I thought Elijah might like to play with me," he said with a smile, and Elijah's face lit up at the idea. They spent the afternoon kicking the ball around in the small yard, with Rachel watching from the porch, her heart full of emotions she wasn't sure she was ready to deal with. Watching them, it was hard not to feel like Alexander was finally beginning to settle into a role he had never anticipated. Meanwhile, Rachel had to constantly remind herself that this wasn't a fairy tale. She wasn't sure how to navigate this new dynamic, how to include Alexander in their lives without losing the independence she had fought so hard to maintain. She still wasn't ready to let him become too involved. The idea of her children becoming attached to someone who, just a few months ago, had been a stranger to them was something Rachel struggled with. One evening, after putting the twins to bed, Rachel sat on the couch, staring at the walls of her apartment, when her phone rang. She looked at the screen, and her heart skipped a beat. It was Alexander. "Rachel," his voice was warm but serious. "Can we talk?" She hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. Was this the moment he was going to push for more involvement? Was he going to ask for full custody or something else she wasn't ready for? She took a deep breath and answered, "Sure, come over." When Alexander arrived, he didn't waste any time. "I want to be clear about something," he began, sitting across from her, his expression serious. "I'm not trying to replace you or take over. I'm not asking for full custody or anything like that, but I do want to be a part of their lives. I've had time to think about this, and I understand if it's complicated, but I don't want you to feel like I'm going to push you out of the picture. You're their mother, and that will never change." Rachel looked at him, her emotions mixed. It was strange hearing him say that, hearing him acknowledge her role and not try to force his way into her children's lives. She had expected something different, something more demanding. But Alexander seemed genuine. He wasn't trying to control the situation. He was simply trying to offer support. "I'm not sure where this is going, Alexander," Rachel admitted, her voice soft. "I'm not sure what it means for us, for the twins, but I know one thing: we can't just pretend like this doesn't matter. It's about them. If they're going to have you in their lives, it's going to be on their terms too, not just yours. They don't need another person to disappoint them, and they don't need someone who's just here because it's the right thing to do." Alexander nodded, understanding. "I get it, Rachel. I don't want to be another disappointment in their lives. I want to be here for them, not for my own sake, but for theirs." For the first time, Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had been so afraid of losing control, of allowing someone into her children's lives who could potentially hurt them. But now, with Alexander sitting across from her, saying all the right things, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was room for him. She wasn't ready to rush into anything, but she knew one thing for sure: the twins deserved to know the truth. They deserved to have a father figure in their lives, if that was what was meant to be. As Alexander left that night, Rachel's thoughts were still heavy, but they were no longer filled with fear. She had no idea where this would lead, but she knew it was time to let go of her doubts and see what happened. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like she could move forward, one step at a time. *** single mom attends the wrong wedding. The billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. ***. The days following their heartfelt conversation, Rachel found herself reflecting on everything that had changed. It had been a week since she and Alexander had talked openly about their future, and she could already see the subtle changes in their relationship. He was still cautious, respecting her space, but he was also making an effort to be more involved in the twins' lives. At first, Rachel had been apprehensive. She had spent years building a life for her children, doing everything on her own. She didn't know what it meant to share that responsibility. But as the days went by, Rachel noticed that her fear was slowly turning into a tentative hope. It wasn't easy. Every visit from Alexander stirred up a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was grateful for the support and care he showed the twins. On the other hand, she struggled to let go of the idea that she was the only one who could fully protect them. One evening, As Rachel prepared dinner, Elijah and Lily ran into the kitchen, excited. "Mom, guess what?" Elijah shouted, his eyes sparkling. "We're going to the park with Mr. Alexander tomorrow." Rachel looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "He said he'd take us to the park and show us how to ride bikes," Lily added, beaming. For a moment, Rachel felt a pang of jealousy. The idea of Alexander stepping into a role she had always filled for her children made her uneasy. She loved them fiercely, and no one had ever come close to being that figure for them until now. But then, looking at her children's faces, she realized that maybe this was the beginning of something good. Maybe it wasn't about losing her role as their mother, but expanding their family in a way she had never imagined. The next day, Rachel watched from a distance as Alexander helped Elijah and Lily with their bikes. He had no idea how to balance their excitement with his own, but he tried. The sight of him laughing with them, showing them how to ride and helping them learn, tugged at Rachel's heart. She had spent years protecting them from the world, but today she realized that maybe the world wasn't as scary as she had thought. Maybe, just maybe, there was space for someone else in their lives. The evening at the park passed, and the kids were more energetic than ever. As they all walked home together, Rachel's mind was spinning. Was this how it was supposed to be? She had never imagined herself as the mother of children with a wealthy father. The idea of Alexander in their lives was still a lot to process. The next week, Alexander invited Rachel to meet with his lawyer. At first, she hesitated. She didn't want to rush anything or make any decisions she wasn't ready to make. But then she thought about the future, about what would be best for her children, and realized that perhaps it was time to hear what he had to say. At the meeting, Alexander's lawyer discussed the potential for setting up a trust for the twins. "This is just a formality," the lawyer explained, "a way to ensure they have financial support should anything ever happen." Rachel's heart sank. She had always been independent, relying on her own ability to provide for her children. The idea of accepting money from someone who had once been a stranger to her, even if he was their father, was something she struggled with. But Alexander, sitting next to her, spoke softly. "I just want them to have what they need," he said. "I've never had to worry about money, but I know what it's like to not have the security you need. I want them to have the freedom to choose their path, without limitations." Rachel looked at him, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, about whether she could allow someone into their lives who had been absent for so long. That night, after the meeting, she sat down with the twins, who were asleep in their beds. Looking at their peaceful faces, she knew she had a decision to make. She couldn't protect them from everything, but she could protect them from the uncertainty of not knowing their father. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be perfect, but Rachel was starting to see that maybe they could all find their place in this new world. And for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that the family she had always dreamed of might finally be coming together. ***, single mom, attends the wrong wedding. The billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. ***. It had been a few weeks since Rachel had agreed to give Alexander more space in their lives, and as time passed, she could feel the dynamics beginning to shift in subtle ways. The twins, Elijah and Lily, had started to embrace Alexander's presence in their lives, and although Rachel had her reservations, she couldn't help but notice how much her children enjoyed their time with him. She had always kept them close, shielding them from anything that might disrupt their stability, but now it seemed like she had no choice but to let them experience this new reality. Alexander had been respectful of her boundaries, never pushing too hard, but there was still the lingering question in Rachel's mind. What did this all mean for her and her children? Was Alexander really ready to be a part of their lives, or was he just trying to check off a box? As she spent more time observing him, Rachel began to see how genuinely invested he was in the twins' happiness. It wasn't just about the money, or the status, or the fact that he was a billionaire CEO. It was about his desire to be present, to be a father, even if he had no idea what that would look like. It was one afternoon, while they were all playing in the park, that Rachel started to see the change in her own heart. Elijah was chasing Alexander around, giggling, while Lily carefully watched from a bench, her favorite book in her hands. Rachel couldn't help but smile at the sight of them, but something inside her also felt a little bittersweet. Her children, her whole world, were growing up. They were starting to bond with someone else, someone who had been absent for most of their lives, and it was no longer just her and her children against the world. She wasn't sure whether that scared her or made her feel relief. As the days passed, Alexander made it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. He started attending school events, bringing the twins ice cream after their doctor's appointments, and even offering to take them on trips. Rachel had been reluctant at first, afraid that any sort of attachment could lead to heartache for the twins, but little by little, she began to see a different side of Alexander. He wasn't trying to be a savior or a superhero. He was just trying to be a father, nothing more, nothing less. And although Rachel still found herself unsure, there was no denying that Alexander was slowly becoming an integral part of their lives. One evening, as Rachel sat on the couch after putting the twins to bed, Alexander called her. "Hey, Rachel." His voice came through the phone, soft but filled with sincerity. "I've been thinking a lot lately. I want to take this seriously, being a part of their lives, I mean. I don't want to just show up when it's convenient. I know I've made mistakes, and I'm not perfect, but I want to try. For them, and for you, if you'll let me." Rachel paused, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected him to say that. It wasn't the grand gesture or the overwhelming promise she had feared. It was simple, honest, and for the first time, Rachel felt a shift in herself. She realized that she wasn't so scared anymore. Maybe it was because, deep down, she could see that Alexander wasn't trying to be anything other than himself. He wasn't trying to buy her trust or her affection. He just wanted to be there. "I don't know where this is going, Alexander," Rachel replied, her voice trembling a little, "but I'll admit, I'm starting to see that you really care about them. I can't promise anything, but I'm willing to try, for their sake." Alexander's voice softened. "That's all I'm asking, one step at a time." In the weeks that followed, Rachel and Alexander continued to navigate their evolving relationship. They weren't rushing anything, and that was what felt different this time. Rachel was still the primary caregiver for the twins, but Alexander was there, contributing in ways that made her feel like they could have a shared future. Slowly but surely, she began to realize that this wasn't just about her and Alexander. It was about creating a new family dynamic for the twins. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but Rachel was beginning to believe that, maybe, they could make it work. Alexander's presence in their lives was still a work in progress, but Rachel could see a future where they all played a part in each other's lives. It wasn't the fairy tale she had once imagined, but it was something real. And for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt like they might actually have a shot at happiness as a family, however unconventional it might be. ***, single mom. Attends the wrong wedding. The billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. ***. The weeks continued to pass, and Rachel began to adjust to the idea of Alexander being a part of their lives. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the unfamiliarity of the situation left her feeling uneasy, but she was starting to see the impact it was having on her children. Elijah and Lily were clearly thriving with the added attention, and that made Rachel feel more at ease. She had always been the one to provide for them, to protect them from the world, and now she was starting to see that it wasn't a threat for Alexander to be involved. In fact, his involvement was just what they needed. Alexander didn't just provide for them financially. He had started to share in the everyday moments that mattered. From helping with homework to joining them for movie nights, his presence became more natural. It wasn't about being the perfect father or making up for lost time. It was about being there, in the present, in whatever way he could. One afternoon, as Rachel was getting dinner ready, Elijah came running into the kitchen, excited. "Mom, guess what? Mr. Alexander is taking us to the zoo this weekend. He promised we could see the elephants." Rachel looked up, a smile tugging at her lips. She had never imagined her life would come to this. She had never imagined a world where Alexander Reed, the billionaire CEO, would be taking her children on trips and spending time with them, as if they were his own. But as the days went on, it began to feel more like normal. In a way, it was beginning to feel like they were becoming a family. The day of the zoo trip arrived, and Rachel decided to go with them. She still felt like an outsider in this world of luxury and wealth, but seeing the twins so excited about the trip made her realize that, maybe, she could find her place in it too. At the zoo, Alexander was fully engaged with the children. He didn't seem bothered by the fact that it was a crowded Saturday, or by the fact that they had to wait in line for a while to get into the exhibits. He was just focused on making sure Elijah and Lily were having the time of their lives. Rachel found herself watching them, feeling a mix of gratitude and amazement. She had never imagined this would be her life, her children, her own little family, with Alexander now playing a part in it. The afternoon passed quickly, The twins were tired by the time they reached the final exhibit, and as they walked back toward the parking lot, Alexander offered to carry Lily, who was lagging behind. She looked up at him and smiled. "Thanks, Mr. Alexander," she said softly. "You're welcome, sweetie," he replied, his voice warm and genuine. As Rachel watched the two of them, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. It was moments like this that made her realize that, despite all the fears and doubts she had, she was doing the right thing. She wasn't sure what the future held for her and Alexander, but she could see that there was potential for something good, something real. That night, after the kids were in bed, Rachel found herself reflecting on the day. Alexander had made it clear that he wasn't asking for anything in return. He didn't expect her to love him right away, or even to let him into their lives completely. He just wanted to be there for them, in whatever capacity that meant. It was a slow process, but she was beginning to let go of her resistance. The next day, Alexander called. "Hey, Rachel, I've been thinking," he said. "I know this is moving at a slow pace, and I don't want to rush anything, but I'd like to talk about the next steps. I want to make sure we're on the same page." Rachel paused. She had been wondering about the future, too. Was this just a phase, or was there a real chance for them to build something together? "I agree," she said finally, her voice steady. "We need to figure out what this means for us and for the kids. I'm not going to pretend it's easy, but I'm willing to see where it goes." Alexander's voice softened. "Thank you, Rachel. I'm in this for the long haul, and I just want to do what's best for you and the kids." As they talked, Rachel felt a shift in her heart. She wasn't fully ready to open up to him, but for the first time, she felt like maybe there was a place for him in their future. Maybe they could make this work. She wasn't sure how it would look, but she knew she didn't want to shut him out completely. The road ahead wasn't clear, but with every step, she felt more and more like they could make it together. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough for now. Asterisk, single mom, attends the wrong wedding, the billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. Asterisk, the days continued to pass, and Rachel found herself growing more accustomed to the idea of Alexander being a regular part of their lives. The twins, Elijah and Lily, were thriving, and she could see how much their bond with Alexander was growing. At first, she had feared that his involvement would disrupt the delicate balance she had worked so hard to maintain, but now it seemed like the pieces were falling into place in ways she hadn't expected. Elijah had taken a particular liking to Alexander, always eager to ask him questions about the world beyond their small apartment. Lily, too, had softened toward him, though she remained more reserved. Rachel found herself starting to trust Alexander in ways she hadn't before. She watched him with the twins, and it was clear that he wasn't trying to replace her as their mother. He was just trying to be a father in his own way. He didn't try to impose his wealth on them or buy their affection. Instead, he focused on the small moments, the laughter they shared during dinner, the way he patiently helped Elijah with his homework, the gentle way he encouraged Lily to open up. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real. The uncertainty that had once consumed Rachel was slowly beginning to dissipate. She realized that she didn't have to do everything alone anymore, and that, maybe, it wasn't so bad to allow someone else into her world. As the weeks went by, Alexander continued to be a steady presence in their lives. He didn't push Rachel to move faster than she was ready to, but he also made it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. The idea of blending their families was still daunting, but with every passing day, Rachel felt more confident that it was something worth exploring. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Alexander invited Rachel to join him for a walk in the park. It was a quiet evening, and the park was nearly empty. The twins were at home, and for the first time in a while, Rachel and Alexander had time to themselves. As they walked, the conversation turned to the future. "I've been thinking," Alexander said, his voice thoughtful. "I know this isn't easy, and I'm not asking for you to have all the answers right away, but I want you to know that I'm here for the long haul, whatever that looks like." Rachel glanced at him, her heart racing. She had been wondering the same thing. Where was this going? Was she ready to let him in completely? Could they really build something together, or was this just a passing chapter in their lives? "I don't know what the future holds," Rachel said, her voice quiet. "But I'm starting to see that it might not be so bad to let you in, to let us be a family, if that's what this is." Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "It's more than just what it is now," he said. "It's what we make of it, together." The words hung in the air, And for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt the weight of the decision that lay ahead of her. But she also felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe they could build something beautiful out of the uncertainty. The road ahead was still unclear, but for the first time, Rachel wasn't afraid to walk down it. She was ready to face whatever came next. With her children, with Alexander, and with herself. They had made it this far, and now it was time to take the next step. As they continued their walk, Rachel realized that this moment, this uncertain, messy moment, was the beginning of something new. And for the first time, she felt ready to embrace it. Single mom attends the wrong wedding. The billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. As the weeks continued to pass, Rachel found herself settling into a new rhythm. She had opened up to Alexander in ways she had never expected, and although it was still a work in progress, there was a sense of calm settling in her heart. The twins had accepted him into their lives with a natural ease, and she couldn't deny that his presence had started to feel like a part of their new reality. She was starting to see him not as the billionaire CEO who had walked into her life unannounced, but as a man who genuinely wanted to be there for her children. He had taken on small roles, helping with homework, attending parent-teacher meetings, and even spending the weekends with the twins, doing simple things like going to the park or the zoo. It wasn't perfect, but Rachel was beginning to believe that maybe this new family dynamic wasn't as impossible as she had once feared. One evening, after putting the twins to bed, Alexander called Rachel. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone serious. She could tell something was on his mind, and the usual unease she felt about his presence lingered in her chest. "Sure, come over," she replied. As Alexander entered her apartment, Rachel noticed the shift in his demeanor. He seemed more serious, less carefree than usual. They sat down on the couch, and Rachel could feel the tension in the air. Alexander took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking about our situation, about you, about us. I know we're moving at a slower pace than either of us probably expected, but I want to make sure we're on the same page. I don't want to be a part-time father. I want to be there for the twins, and I want you to know that I'm committed to this, to you, and to them." Rachel felt her heart race. She had always been the one to manage everything, to keep control, to keep her children safe. The idea of allowing someone else to take on that role was both comforting and terrifying. "I don't know what that looks like, Alexander," Rachel said, her voice soft but firm. "I don't know what the future holds for us. I'm still trying to figure out how all of this fits together." Alexander nodded, his eyes sincere. "I understand. I'm not asking for a perfect relationship, Rachel. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready for, but I want you to know that I'm here for the long run. If that means taking it slow, so be it. I'll wait as long as it takes." Rachel looked at him, searching his face for any signs of hesitation, but all she saw was commitment. He wasn't asking for anything from her, but offering something she didn't know if she was ready to accept: time, patience, and the promise of being a real father to her children. For the first time, Rachel felt the weight of the decision in front of her, but this time, it didn't feel as heavy. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was beginning to understand that she didn't have to navigate it alone. She had a choice, and for once, she could see the potential for something more. "Okay," she said after a long pause, her voice steady. "I don't know what it will look like, but I'm willing to try. For the twins. For us." Alexander's face lit up with a mixture of relief and joy. "Thank you, Rachel," he said, his voice full of emotion. "I promise I won't let you down. We'll take this one step at a time." As they sat there, a sense of quiet understanding passed between them. Rachel wasn't fully sure what the next chapter of their lives would look like, but she knew that, for the first time in a long time, she was open to the possibility of a future with Alexander in it. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be perfect, but it was real, and that was enough for now. The next morning, the twins were excited as usual, rushing to get ready for school. Elijah couldn't wait to tell Alexander about his latest school project, and Lily was already planning the next weekend outing. Rachel watched them, a sense of peace settling in her chest. She hadn't expected this life, this family, but it was beginning to feel like it could be hers. It wasn't the life she had planned, but maybe it was the one she needed. With Alexander by her side, and with the twins growing up with a father figure in their lives, Rachel felt like they might just have a chance at something beautiful. They had taken the first steps towards something new, and for the first time in a long time, Rachel believed in the possibility of a future filled with love, trust, and a sense of belonging. Asterisk, asterisk. Single mom attends the wrong wedding. The billionaire groom freezes when he sees the twins. Asterisk, asterisk. As time went on, the new family dynamic between Rachel, Alexander, and the twins started to feel more natural. Alexander continued to show up for Elijah and Lily in small but meaningful ways, and though Rachel still held on to a degree of hesitation, she began to feel a sense of peace she hadn't experienced before. There were still moments of doubt, of course. Rachel often found herself asking if she was making the right decision, wondering if opening their lives to Alexander would ultimately hurt her children. But when she saw the joy on their faces as they bonded with him, she knew she couldn't keep them from the possibility of something good, something real. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Alexander was there for the twins not because he was trying to be a replacement for their biological father, but because he genuinely cared about them. That made all the difference to Rachel. She no longer saw him as the billionaire stranger who had shown up at their doorstep. She saw him as a man who wanted to be a part of their lives, not just in a financial sense, but as someone who cared deeply for her children and, ultimately, for her as well. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Elijah spoke up. "Mr. Alexander, are you going to come to my soccer game this weekend?" The question hung in the air, and Rachel's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the first time Elijah had asked about Alexander's involvement, but this time felt different. There was hope in his voice, a sense that he had already begun to see Alexander as a constant in his life. Alexander smiled warmly, his eyes lighting up. "Of course, Elijah," he replied. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Rachel watched the exchange, a swell of emotion rising in her chest. The pieces were finally falling into place. She had always been afraid that letting someone else into her children's lives would somehow break their bond, but she was starting to realize that it didn't have to be an either-or situation. She didn't have to give up her role as their mother to allow Alexander to be a part of their lives. She could still be the protector, the guide, and the constant in their world. And maybe, just maybe, Alexander could be the father figure they needed. The days leading up to the soccer game passed quickly, and on the day of the match, Rachel found herself standing at the sidelines, watching as Elijah played with an enthusiasm she hadn't seen before. Alexander stood beside her, cheering along with her. It wasn't a fairy tale, it wasn't perfect, but it was their reality, and for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt like they had a chance at happiness, at creating something that worked for them. After the game, as the family walked home together, Elijah and Lily were practically bursting with excitement, talking about everything that had happened. Alexander was right there with them, laughing and asking about the game, showing interest in the smallest details of their lives. Rachel found herself smiling as they made their way back to their apartment. This wasn't the life she had planned, but it was one she was starting to accept, starting to embrace. She didn't know what the future held, but she was beginning to believe in the possibilities. Alexander was no longer just the man who had been part of their lives by chance. He was becoming someone they could count on, someone who had shown he was willing to put in the effort for their future. As they reached their building, Alexander turned to Rachel. "I know things have been complicated, and I'm not expecting everything to be perfect overnight. But I'm here. For you. For the twins. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Rachel looked at him, her heart full. "I don't know what the future holds either, but for the first time I feel like we might just make it work, one step at a time." They stood there for a moment, the sounds of the city around them fading into the background. For the first time in a long time, Rachel felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. It wasn't easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but with Alexander by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came their way. They had started this journey uncertain of where it would lead, but now, for the first time, Rachel was starting to believe that together they could make it work. And with that, they walked into the future, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. I've got an amazing story for you, inspired by true-life millionaire stories that will take you on an emotional journey of unexpected love, family, and change. In this story, a single mom meets a billionaire CEO under the most surprising circumstances and slowly builds a bond with him while learning to trust him with her children's future. The twists and turns in their journey together bring the warmth of real-life millionaire stories to light as the characters face their fears and create a new family dynamic. Through patience, honesty, and persistence, their journey together highlights the complexities of family, love, and sacrifice, an unexpected story of how love finds its way into even the most uncertain lives. This millionaire story not only touches hearts, but inspires viewers to believe in second chances and the possibility of change, as it showcases the growth of a family and the real struggles that come with blending lives and families. As the story unfolds, it challenges the notion of who a family can truly be, bringing forth the most genuine and heartwarming millionaire stories ever told, where love and commitment overcome barriers and open doors to a future filled with hope.